Good evening. I guess it's getting close to the time where, best of my understanding, might not be able to use this thing here for Hangouts. Haven't been looking into it, so maybe it'll work with Google Hangouts or something. I'm not sure. Don't know yet. Gonna take a look here at the Hangout. Thought I'd just have a Hangout. Haven't been doing too much with this stuff anyhow, but see what's happening. I figured sit here and make some noise on guitar a bit, see if that's working out. On see how that works. Cupcake Puppy, what's happening? Fingers should. Maybe this is working. Hey, what do you see? What do you think? No sound. Well, also, I don't have sound. That could be. Pretty bad. Bible literalist, how you doing? I'm gonna throw a link out here. I don't know if I've seen your channel, Bible literalist. If I can picture who you are, that's an interesting name, though. Interesting channel. Wait, I think I do know who the Bible literalist is now that I think about it. I think that's Paula's channel. Channel. Never mind, Paula's channel. That's it. Yes, I remember now. Yeah. How have you been doing? I was something I did have on my mind though a good bit lately is the stuff with well, politics and religion. I'm trying to keep down anybody getting worked up or anything. If I'm going to have a hangout, I don't want anybody worked up. So I'll just talk about religion and politics. And but no, the issue with Illy and I think Omar, that I don't know. Some people seem really upset over it. Well, I might be one. Well, somewhat. Yeah, it. People saying it's racism. I don't know. I don't know. Deal. Hello.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, 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 I can.
Cool. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah. Do you know anything about that deal with that Omar and uh, I guess Trump asked her to go back home or something, or I don't know if you paid any attention to that stuff.
I think I don't pay a lot of attention. I just see stuff in news feeds and just gloss over it, but um I think he'd gone back and forth on whether he said that or not, but she's in all kinds of other trouble anyway, so
She is.
yeah, I guess she divorced her husband and then is being investigated for something. I forget what, but
No.
she's in some kind of legal trouble.
Yeah, I don't follow a lot with Glenn Beck and stuff, but I did see something that he had said about that, and I didn't know if it was pushing it too far or if there was maybe something really happening there with that. Didn't look good, but apparently they made more of an issue with anti-Semitism and that kind of thing in Congress, I guess. My understanding, but I think the issue was probably somebody that maybe thought the Jews were responsible for 9/11 or that and can't say anything against radical Islam at least anyhow. It
Yeah,
makes for an odd person in Congress.
it sure does. That's a serious conflict of interest, I would say.
Yeah. It hello, Pure Word Ministries. No, okay, I'll throw another link in there. Pure Word Ministries says she's married her brother. Okay, well that kind of stuff could cause a problem, I suppose. That
And supposedly she did it just so she could get into the country.
yeah, and it's something
Yeah.
about college or something, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's bizarre. And yet, yeah, my goodness. So
Yeah.
I guess I was watching something the guy did that it's a good harmonica player, guy I've always respected, and he's a college professor. But anyhow, he uh, he was just saying how with Trump saying that how terribly racist it was. And I'm like, boy, I don't know. I think what she said could be taken as racist.
Oh yeah, easily. Very
Well,
much.
in fact, I think it might have been, and I think that's why Pelosi said, if I understand it was Pelosi who said then they weren't, that no anti-Semitism or something like that. So I think,
Well, yeah, I was just gonna say it's such a total corrupted mess in Washington. It really it's kind of trifling at this point because they should all be fired.
maybe I don't know. Of course, then what do you do though?
Well, the thing is how to do a graceful transfer of power, which the Constitution allows for, but the problem is corruption is so wide and deep that it might take something drastic to fix it. Draining the swamp, you have to do more than just drain the swamp. There's a big, big, big problem. And I don't know how to do that painlessly.
Right, right. Yeah. It seems. I think Trump is he's an odd guy. I'm not sure what to think exactly, but but I didn't. I don't think there was a lot of choice, and in a lot of ways, I think he's done good. Um, Certainly not everything. Well, I mean, I don't know how to say that. Probably the worst thing it gets me as a president would probably just be his general behavior at times. That would probably be about it.
Yeah, but they all have, you know, been despicable people in private. We just didn't know as much about it as we do now.
That could be. Yeah, I mean, he's kind of a rough dude, but I think in other ways, I like the guy, you know. So I mean, that's me. But when I hear everybody yelling that he's racist, I kind of wonder, boy, I don't know. I'm not. I kind of get the idea where people might think that, but I don't think that's really the deal.
No, he's had. I mean, there are plenty of evidence of in the past his business dealings where he would have black people or women or other minorities, and hasn't shown any discrimination in practice that I know of.
Yeah, there might
So
have been something when his father owned some housing or something. I think there's something there with that, but I'm not sure that how much it had to do with him directly. You know, and
right,
so yeah, it's kind of a strange thing. You know, I just see a lot of talk about it lately, and
right.
it seems to be getting worse and worse. It appears to me, maybe I'm just noticing that. I'm not sure, but
Well, that's the media. They feed you what they want you to feel like, and they harp on things that are blown out of proportion, or and ignore the things that are really a lot worse.
yeah, not I can't help but ask, such as what though?
What's that?
I mean, what kind of things do you have, or do you have anything that comes to mind as far as things that are much worse?
Oh, like I mean the human trafficking that's been going on. They're finally outing a lot of people, like in the FBI, I guess it is, and some in the military who were doing human trafficking. Um, all sorts of lying and corruption at pretty much every level. Ignoring the laws, ignoring the Constitution, and things like that stupid Affordable Care Act that is not affordable and has nothing to do with care.
Right.
That is totally unconstitutional, and they won't. That's Congress's fault. The whole Congress.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I guess kind of what I see going on though is a larger and larger separation of liberals and conservatives just seems to be getting. I don't think it's mellowing any. I think in some ways it's getting worse. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's just how I'm seeing it.
there are some people who are seeing how seeing past their party lines, but there are a lot of other people who are just digging in even more, especially on the left, where they are wanting to destroy the country. Essentially, they're against capitalism. They're against a constitutional republic, and they're doing everything to tear it apart, from the family to every institution. That's why there's an immigration problem, because no other country, well, I can't say it, Western countries in general, are the ones who are just opening their borders and putting such a strain on the working class that the working class disappears. And that's what's happening to our middle class, because we can't pay for them to have all these free things and free medical care and free housing, while we pay for our own and theirs through taxes. And it's the Ploward I'm saying that Ploward Cliven's strategy. I'm saying it wrong. Where it's deliberately overtaxing the social welfare system, so it destroys the middle class. I mean, that's their stated goal. And that's what's going
Yeah,
on.
yeah. I think it's really hard on people that are living below middle class. I think that have lived here, for a long time, grew up here, born here, generations. I think it's hard on them. You know, it,
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean,
how do you find jobs if a good many of the jobs are being taken?
right. And half the time, though, it isn't that people who were born here won't take the jobs. It's that they can't make enough money to pay the taxes that support the people who weren't born here, who expect everything for free. And that's the
Well,
great injustice of it, I think.
yeah, I do think that people have a hard time surviving without making much, though. I really do understand that, but it's but it is weird if somebody comes in that's it's not even legal and they're getting all kinds of free things, and then somebody who
Right.
born here is kind of almost being punished for
Exactly.
that's odd, you know.
Well, that's deliberate. They're destroying the middle class. They took away our manufacturing and sent it to other countries with slave labor practically, and then
Oh,
they bring in, increase the burden of the taxpayers with fewer jobs and fewer good paying jobs.
yeah. I mean, I think part of the problem there, though, is I think it really is a big, serious problem, at least as I see it. That the whole ordeal probably would be with China. 90 some percent of that has to be China. I mean, what do you do? I mean, how in the world do people? Well, you answered. Actually, you answered my question. Is we can't compete with slave labor.
Right.
I mean, that's those people have to be obviously working for next to nothing. I mean,
Oh yeah, they are.
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, when you look at the prices for most of the things we own, though, but I mean, if we were to try to make a motherboard or uh, hard drives or most any components, try to make them here in the states, we could never compete with China.
Yeah, and part of the issue is some, I guess, rare earth elements that are only in places like China or Africa or someplace, that the US doesn't have those certain minerals.
Oh
But
wow, I didn't know that.
yeah, there's rare elements that are used in not, we got plenty of silicone, but we don't have a lot of other things that are in the circuitry and in the chips themselves that are,
Hmm.
the connecting the circuits themselves, and so, but I think, it just seems historically uh, suicidal for any nation to not be self-sufficient if they can help it. We got plenty of natural resources, but we've chosen profit over security and don't make enough of our own stuff like we used to. That's why, we were usually, a lot stronger country before, because we made our own steel and we made our own materials of other things, and we grew our own food and didn't uh, you know, s- spray it with who knows what that made everybody sick and need more health care. And it's just a
Yeah.
vicious cycle.
Oh, yeah, we did make heck, even like old guitars and stuff. We made our own cheap guitars on top of making good ones. We also made our own cheap stuff here.
Hmm.
But I think we just couldn't compete. Well, actually, that a lot of that started with Japan in the '60s. We couldn't compete with that either. They were kind of rough. I mean, kind of cool, but kind of rough. And then Japan certainly doesn't make anything cheap anymore. But Korea, Taiwan, China, that kind of thing. But particularly with China, for the money, I mean, you get a lot of bang for the buck. But it does hurt our jobs, and actually throughout most of Europe, I think. I mean, they're dealing with the same thing they have for years.
Right. Plus, the problem is that they don't have their national laws. They're more dictatorships, and so they don't have safety standards. A lot of the stuff that comes over from especially China is either poisonous or substandard because they don't care. They just will sell you whatever you'll buy. And we have, part of the reason things are more expensive here is because of regulations. And they're not always good regulations, but sometimes they are. And that's why we can't make them as cheap, because we make them more carefully, I guess you could say. They're not made of things that would poison you. But on the other hand, our pharmaceuticals deliberately poison people. I mean, I've seen too many studies and reports of, by doctors and researchers, that vaccines, no matter what they're made of, are doing some kind of harm. And
Yeah,
So
I've heard that. I mean, it's.
yeah.
I think there's a lot of question in that. I think it's a tough area. I mean, in the sense that vaccines do seem to work, and yet some people claim there's some major issues with them. So I don't know. What do you do?
Yeah, on the one hand, I mean, it's standard medicine, Western medicine is really good at trauma and surgery. If you need even diagnosis, if you want to see what's going on in somebody without cutting them open, that's where Western medicine really shines. I mean, let's face it, if you had a serious raging infection, the natural herbs are going to be more slow acting and might be too slow, whereas even the artificial drugs will probably save your life, but they're not good for you in the long run, and they're not good for prevention. And that's where the natural stuff comes in, is
Yeah,
better at prevention.
it
But
yeah,
yeah,
it
go ahead.
could be. I had an interest years ago in glucosamine and chondroitin sulfates. Are you familiar with that?
Hmm.
And I was uh, it it was iffy as to whether it actually worked or not. And but I took it for quite a few years, along with fish oil with omega-3 fatty acids, and I guess you can get it from what, linseed oil too, I guess, or
Or flaxseed or something like
that's
that.
what I
Yeah.
mean. That's where you get flax. Yeah,
Okay.
flaxseed. Yeah, I shouldn't really drink boiled linseed oil. That's bad. That's not good for you. But yeah, flax oil. Um, but I think that fish oils are obviously they work. And I forget where they get chondroitins. I think they get it from possibly shells, seashells, or something. And there might be some chicken bones. I'm not sure where all you can get that, but um, maybe it's chicken marrow. I'm not sure. But the thing is, though, that years later, I was hearing a lot of questions as to whether it really worked or not. Then I was reading things recently where they're saying that it's not actually even working for dogs. Yet they thought it did. So I don't know. It's
Mm.
complicated.
Well, yeah, and that's why it's important, even if whether you're using mainstream medicine or natural, holistic medicine, you have to really know what you're doing, because it's biology is very complex, and you can solve one problem and create another.
But you remember, like years ago, though. I mean, everybody pretty well swore by glucosamine and chondroitin that was like the cure for arthritis.
Hmm.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what to think. It still seems. I mean, there's very few doctors I know that would argue with fish oil, at least to thin your blood.
Right. I mean, mostly if something is what people used to always thrive on in the past, it's there's something good about it in nature, but then we don't have nature like we used to either, because of pollution and uh, genetic modification and all that sort of thing, and pesticides and antibiotics. That's all ruining the whole food chain. Not absolutely completely, but some things that were you know really healthy in the past might not be as much today. And our food, it's known that if you like most of the, like 50% of the nutrition in vegetables and fruits comes when it just before it ripens. And so if they pick it early to get more shelf life and ship it green, you only get half the nutrition you used to get.
Hmm.
So that kind of mass farming method is also a problem.
Yeah. Then on the other hand, what do you do? It's kind of tough.
I know. And
Yeah.
even if you grow your own, you still you have to know what you're doing, and to
Well,
get all
yeah,
that
yeah,
nutrition. So
that's true. But it would probably be better. But yeah, some people feel frozen vegetables are better than fresh anymore, or at least years ago they were saying that. I'm not sure now.
I have to agree, because the frozen ones are picked riper because they're going to be frozen, so they don't have to worry as much about shelf life. So they picked them at an optimal time, and they don't um, lose anything, because when you pick something that isn't going to be frozen, you have to pick it earlier, and it goes through a lot more shipping, and it sits around at room temperature in the open air. So I do think that the frozen ones are better if they're done right.
Yeah. I noticed here in the comments, hello to Brett McCord and Pure Word Ministries. I think it's hi, I think. And Cupcake Puppy says, I just rubbed WD-40 all over. Actually, that's an old one. That's been around a long time, that idea. And I tried it. I'm not sure it works. I still think Old Spice smells better, though. I mean, that might smell bad to some people, but WD-40, man, I don't know. You spray that in your car or something, on something in the interior up under the dash or something, and freeze something up, or then it'll smell like that for weeks.
Yeah.
I don't know if you spray that on your body or not. It's kind of cool, though, maybe.
I wouldn't try it, actually.
I have,
Have you?
Sure, yeah. I'd be like working on something, once in a while, like an old pocket knife or something to be all rusty or something kind of rough, and I'll spray WD-40 on it and get some on my hands and rub it in.
Oh, boy.
Hey, Justin Manning. Old Spice, the name of one of the Spice Girls. No. Old Spice, that is really, really, really old, man. I think it does go back to early 1900s or something. I mean, it goes back a good long time. And it's, I think, I don't know. I mean, yeah, you can buy it cheap, too. I don't know if it cures arthritis, but it keeps people away. And now there's a scary thought. Brett McCord says not enough minerals in the soil to get our food. That could be a problem.
Yeah, the farming methods are meant for profit, not health. The big commercial farms.
Yeah. I think although I think we eat fairly well here, though, compared to some countries. Obviously.
Yeah.
Compared to some.
Yeah, there's some, especially like in India, the Far East, that are, putting waste into the same water they're drinking and bathing in, and they don't care if that same diseased water goes into their crops and all that. So
that's really rough. I mean, it bugs me that tap water where it comes from, but it does appear that it goes through a purification process. I guess I don't know how they do it, but to think where that comes from. All the way from India. I don't know.
Yeah. I used to wonder why it is. It always seemed that flu season would start in Asia someplace. I used to wonder why that was. And it seems obviously the sanitation.
Good point. Yeah, I never thought of that, really. Yeah, that makes sense.
And that, as far as I've been able to find out, is really what eradicates disease is sanitation and not vaccines, because most things were caused by either poor nutrition or poor sanitation or extreme stress. And those are the reasons, people used to die so much younger. But diseases like polio, for example, were pretty much gone in the Western world before the vaccine came along. And after it was first administered, the incidence of polio went way up at first, so they actually were causing the diseases. And by their nature, vaccines bypass the body's normal defense systems, and that makes it weaker. That's why you have to have booster shots.
Did it just keep going up because it was already on the rise and just was a problem until they finally got it under control? I'm just wondering if that's a possibility, though.
Well, from what I've read, at least, it seems like it was on its way out. Before the vaccines, and I think it. What's
saying
that?
That it got worse so after the vaccines.
Yeah.
So that means it would have been getting better, and then it got worse again.
Yeah, I mean, it was very rare, and then they introduced the vaccine, and it came back. So
Yeah, it's hard
yeah.
to tell. But it does seem that for the most part it got rid of it too, though, doesn't it?
It's hard to say because a lot of times you find out that records were falsified and cause of death was attributed to something else, you know. I read a thing recently that uh, uh, millions of people who were diagnosed with cancer never had it at all, and they had to go through chemo, and they died or they got very sick and disfigured, and they never had cancer at all. This is coming
Wow.
out because it's big business.
I didn't know.
So yeah, it's corrupt.
Well, I think something must work in some modern medicines, or we wouldn't live longer today.
Yeah, yes and no. Like I was saying, for surgery and things like that, trauma, um, getting stuff into your system that helps you quick, that's where they excel. But they overdo that to the extent, like I said, that they will diagnose somebody with something just to get them treated because it's profitable. So the problem is corruption. It's not necessarily technology.
Right, right. Yeah, I don't know. I think some modern medications are probably pretty good, but there probably are some. I know a lot of people see how they can get things from Europe that they can't get here,
Right.
which I'm imagine is true, and it might depend on what parts of Europe. But I'm sure there's money involved. But sometimes I think the states tends to be a little more picky than some parts in Europe too, though, isn't it?
Sometimes, um, like for example, that thalidomide scandal where I watched a full documentary on it. That was they were giving to pregnant women for morning sickness, and it turned out to severely deform their children. But it took a long time to get that off the market because egos and money. A lot of times it's somebody's career or reputation, and they want to find a cure, or they want to be selling millions of pills to people that they know after they know it's harmful and they didn't do adequate testing, they still want to sell them, and it takes forever to get it off the market. And it's just normal, it seems. But here again, it depends. It's a little bit different politically and economically in the UK, for example, than it is here. But I think the differences are kind of blending away in recent years, it seems.
Yeah, yeah. Brett McCord was saying that high fructose corn syrup is one of the things that is hurting us. They use it in everything, and that is probably true that they use it in everything. I do wonder how bad it is for us. So I don't know. I've wondered about that for a number of years. It for me, sugar in general, or any amount of carbohydrates is too much is bad for me with high blood sugar. But
Right.
um, I definitely fight that.
I think it is pretty solid evidence that high fructose corn syrup is worse than sugar. Um, I forget the details. It's been a long time, but now they don't even have to label it. They just call it fructose, even though fructose is supposedly just fruit sugar. That's not what this is. And they are being dishonest in not labeling it because they know people have caught on that high fructose corn syrup is not good for you. So they
You
just
think it
rebranded
converts?
it.
You think
Huh?
it converts too quick, or it gets in your blood system too fast, or
I do believe it has a very high glycemic index, higher than regular sugar, but I think there's other stuff like in the processing of it that makes harmful compounds, but I don't remember the details of that.
but I think like if you just eat a piece of fruit or something, my understanding is that because it's a solid, it's like if you drink a glass of orange juice, that hits you pretty hard and pretty quick. But if you eat an orange or an apple or something, it takes longer to break it all down. So I don't think it's quite as bad.
Right. That's just because it's in its natural balance of other substances that slow down, the absorption of the sugars. So that, yeah, if you eat it the way it's presented in nature, it's a lot better for you.
Hey, you know something? It's interesting. That you're here though. I was talking about. I know that you spend some time with some of the. I guess would it be fair or right to call them conspiracy type?
Yeah, I think so.
Um, what do you? If I'm asking, what do you think about the Mandela effect?
I think it's not true. Um, I know there are people who just, you know, sincerely believe it absolutely is, but there's also, I think, an element of it that some even would call a form of a spell, because they would say, "Well, I used to be deep into it. I would see it everywhere. It was very real, and then I renounced it, and now it doesn't happen to me anymore." So it might be some kind of, I hate to use the word psyop, but um, when I look at the details, in the Bible, for example, people will say that about the lion and the lamb and things like that, and you investigate it, and it's not true at all. I mean, there people misremember, but when you think about it, if the Mandela effect is true, you would never be able to prove it because it changes the evidence. So if it can actually magically change the words on pieces of paper that's been on your shelf for 100 years, what's the point? Because you can never know what it really used to be. Some people remember it one way, some another, and
That's a good point. I never really thought of that. That if actually was true, because if some people remember it different than another, how would you know? Except I
right,
have to admit though that the reason I have a hard time believing that uh, the people who believe it in the Bible, I have a hard time believing God would uh, allow all the Bibles to be changed, and then with that, all the commentaries and everything else, Strong's Concordance, everything would have to change with it.
right. Plus, whenever it supposedly happens, it's usually something trivial, like uh, debts versus trespasses in the Lord's Prayer, even though it's both ways, they're two different contexts.
That's supposed to be. I think guy I thought brought up some good points. Bill from oh, why can't I think? Oh boy, I can't think of the name of his channel. Anyhow, um, he was bringing up that that's from some kind of prayer book,
Mm.
a
Well,
common prayer book or something. I forget what it's called now exactly.
the Book of Common Prayer or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But the thing is, there's in two different of the Gospels, the Lord's Prayer is recorded, and one says debts and the other says trespasses.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that's the problem. It's like with those lion and lamb passages. There's a couple of those as well, but both of them have all those animals: lion, lamb, wolf, serpent. They're all in the same passage, and people just remember an abbreviated version of it, like a condensed version of it, and then they
Oh,
think on Mandela effect when they actually read it.
hey, Shepard. Yeah, I think that when people read through Isaiah, they probably just don't even think about it. They just probably just reading through the words and just reading it and not paying attention to for people that actually even have read it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the stories, like in the New Testament, we think of the lion and the lamb, right?
Right, and I
So
can tell you why. Because Jesus is both the sacrificial lamb and the lion of the tribe of Judah. So that's, I
right.
think, why they put those two together.
Hmm. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I think so. And so then when they see something in Isaiah and they say a wolf, wait a minute, man, the wolf's bad. That can't be.
Right.
So it turns into this big theory, and it's well, if it was actually happening, you couldn't read a cookbook and expect anything to turn out right.
Right. Yeah. Things outside of the Bible like that, or like movies. It's like, why are they changing tiny little things that don't matter that would be trivia questions, instead of something serious like JFK wasn't shot, or, you know, George Washington was never president. They don't change that stuff.
Well, that's something a buddy of mine that's in a guitar community, and he often has brought that up. That it's never anything major
Mm-hmm.
that you would definitely remember. George Bush was never our president. That kind of thing,
Right.
or his father, or his son. Neither of them. It never happened.
Yeah. So when I put all those red flags together, I'm just like, nah, I don't know what's going on with it, because some things are pretty bizarre, but overall, there's just, it's too much wrong with it,
Yeah, I suppose it gets people excited and gives them something to think about.
Oh yeah.
Like that.
But when you consider, for example, little things in Star Wars, right? Do you know how many times and different versions they've released of those? I had the original VHS tapes a long time ago. I wish I still had them. But then when they re-released as a collector's set, I would notice little things were different. And then they'd re-release it again when they made more movies. They released the whole set again, and it would be changed again. For example, when in the movie where the part where Darth Vader's got Luke out on that I don't know, tower or something, and he's cut off Luke's hand and all that, and Luke's about to fall. Well, when he falls in the original, there was no sound. He didn't scream while he was falling. In the re-release, they put a scream in. And then the one after that, they took it back out. And with R2-D2, when he was in Dagobah, when he was spat out by that swamp serpent or whatever it was, the first time, the original, Luke says, it's a good thing you don't taste very good, which makes sense. But the re-release, it says, you're lucky to get out of there. And that's not Mandela effect. That's just George Lucas continually changing and putting in different clips, when he re-releases stuff.
I've never watched that movie that much, but I should probably watch it someday. I don't know. I just never got into Star Wars too much.
Yeah, I just, just using that as an example of why it is that there are changes and different things people remember. It's because they kept re-releasing it with little changes in it.
Yeah, it's. I think if somebody, I've watched I think every episode of The Twilight Zone, and I think if somebody told me that something here or there changed, of course they probably wouldn't use that in it because it wouldn't be any fun because not enough people. It's not like a movie. Movies probably they can affect more people that don't remember it as well as they could.
Somebody mentioned about the way we remember thing. I totally agree, because I remember I have a vivid memory of when we were little kids, we decided to find out if cats really do land on their feet if you drop them from a balcony. So we did it, right? And I can see the whole thing. But later I realized that I wasn't even born yet when that happened, because they, my other siblings were certain age. And I couldn't have remembered that. But what happens is that they tell you what they did, and when you're a little kid, you're visualizing the scene. And later that becomes your memory, because when you're that young, you don't always know the difference, and so it gets etched in your mind as your own memory, your own experience, when it couldn't have been. And that's because just the way the very young brain is forming, as soon as you're old enough to visualize something, that's so early that it becomes your own experience. And I think that's why, just a property of the brain when it's developing. And the same thing can happen on the other end, where you have parts of your memory get fuzzy or not used very much, and it will start to fade. And your brain will just fill in the blanks with something, just like it does when you're dreaming, That's just the way brains work, and we swear up and down that this is the way something happened when it couldn't have, and your
Yeah,
memory is the problem. Yeah.
yeah. I had a thing though when I was a kid that there was a girl that I went to the school with, and it was a special school, so it was a number of miles away, like probably 15 miles away or so. Um, yeah, 15 or 20 miles away. At any rate, what was kind of weird though is I had a dream that she moved into my neighborhood, either like a couple houses down or down at the end of the street. So the couple houses down, oddly enough, I remember some guy was outside, and they were like moving stuff into the house, and he had like a small truck there or something, a U-Haul truck, whatever it was. And I remember asking him if he had a daughter named Tina, and he said he did. I remember he looked at me kind of weird. Now, the thing that's weird though is this girl Tina actually did move there, and that was the girl from the school. So I don't know if I had a dream. What I've always wondered though, did I have the dream afterwards, and I thought it was before? I don't know for sure. It does appear to me that that I had the dream and then it happened later, or I wouldn't have stopped and asked him if he had a daughter like I saw in a dream. I think.
Right.
I don't know. It's weird stuff. I really don't know. I wouldn't trust my dreams to foretell the future though, even if it was the case.
Right.
I would call the psychic network if I wanted to know that stuff. I'm sorry. That's a bad joke. But but I don't know. Stuff like that maybe does happen in life. I don't know.
And that's why people started writing things down, memories are
True.
faulty.
Well, that's true. You are right. Yeah, I think that yeah, if there's something I really want to know or remember, I will write it down. Something I need to
Yeah.
know accurately. Well, and that is also though why when we get to the memory thing of when you go to the Bible or most any book or whatever you have, it's been sitting on the shelf. I think you can trust that it reads the same way as it did.
Yeah, I just have I think there's a serious burden of proof on anybody to say that a 100-year-old Bible on the shelf has been changed while it's sitting on your shelf.
Yeah, that's just totally crazy.
But that's the problem I think comes from people insisting that their memories cannot be faulty.
Well, yeah, and in fact, what I've seen people say is that things within the Bible they're actually wrong. Things changed, even though they're not big issues that affect anything major. At least they know which one's right because their memory, and what God's
Mhm.
telling them of what actually should be there, as opposed to what's written in it. And personally, I think they just get the NIV mixed up with it. That's what I think happens.
Yeah, that's a large part of it. If there's so many different translations that it can be confusing. But the thing is, I think Mandela effect overall is kind of a reverse gaslighting, you know, where instead of trying to convince you your memory is bad, they convince you that your memory is the only thing that's good, which isn't an improvement. It's still a kind of gaslighting.
Well, especially though when they say God gave it to them, and that's how they know. They're almost acting in a prophetic manner.
Right.
Um, and it's yeah, it's just weird. I think the weirdest combination of it though to me is when people used Second Thessalonians chapter 2, I guess, try to say it's the great delusion, a great deception,
Oh, yeah.
and that well, if that's the case, then it wouldn't be trivial things; it would be major issues.
Right.
And apparently, that's going to happen. Well, anybody who actually uses that tries to line it up with that section of scripture, then it has to get worse to where the Bible be totally, totally trash.
Right. And the thing is about that strong delusion is it specifically states it's from God to them who have despised the truth.
Right, exactly. That's
So,
what it's about. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it's not on everybody. It's to people who hate truth. He'll say, "Okay, I've had it. I'm going to give you what you've been asking for. You hate truth, so I'm going to give you a colossal lie."
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Thought I put a link in there. I must have it goofed up or something.
Well, it worked for me.
Yeah, I might have copied it wrong. Didn't see the. So what's I saw that lately you were around more with the oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the right word. Grace. Um,
Oh, you mean like Sin City Preacher, Renee Roland?
yeah.
Yeah.
The more the free grace, I think kind of movement. I always want to say easy believism, but I think they go by the term free grace. Is that right? Or
Yeah, pretty much. It's not completely extreme three grace like the free grace society or anything like that, but just to mention a comment in the chat as well. I know that I have some serious theological disagreements with them, and they know it. Right? I don't believe in annihilationism. I don't elevate the King James, but what I see there is people who seem to have the most important things right. They have the gospel right. They have security right. Um, I don't get along with Matthias, especially. I really don't. I try to avoid him because of just behavioral issues that I've had with him in the past.
yeah, see, no, it's odd.
Um,
I haven't had that. I generally like his personality, even though we disagree.
yeah, we had argued, years ago over women in the church, and we went around and around on it. And every time I asked him, about women preachers, I mean, I asked him like 4 different times over a couple days, and he gave me 4 or 5 different answers. It was never the same answer twice, and so that really irritated me. But um, the thing is that they're, here I am disagreeing with them on some pretty important things like annihilationism, right? And they haven't shut me out or anything. So I'm just, addressing a comment in the chat mainly that, I have serious theological differences with some of them, and not all the same thing. But what they have right is treating people like Christians, as far as I can tell, um, the way a community of Christians should operate. Um, so, I wouldn't call them a cult. I think I would have to look at each instance as far as what it is that they wouldn't tolerate. Because if they're, very heavy King James and they're not chasing me away, that's a big deal. That's a good indicator to me. Um, and they know that I'm not an annihilationist, which they're very passionate about. So for them not to push me away really means something to me. So that's the main reason I'm there. I can't hear you. You're far from your mic, I think.
Yeah, I walked too far away from my mic.
Yep.
Annihilationist means that you just believe that everything's going to burn up and it's done.
Actually, they believe that wicked people will not suffer in hell for eternity. They'll
Right.
just be destroyed. That's what annihilationism is.
Yeah, that's. I'm not. I don't think that's. I think it's Matthew 25:46 or something in there. That's the. If that's the right verse about eternal life or eternal.
Yeah.
And I don't know. That was a verse that hit me like years ago. It's like, wait, there's no way to get around this. It.
Right. That's one of them. I've done a video on it, but I mean, I see there. I mean, it's not a new argument to me. There's annihilationism, universalism, Calvinism, all the isms, but um, it's their personal conviction and mine is the opposite, but they're still including me. They're still not pushing me away. And that was kind of the point I was trying to get,
Right.
Looking at the chat again. Yeah, I know Matthias isn't all he portends to be necessarily, but they like him, and until something comes up, I won't be able to say anything because I'm not there to split them up. I'm not there to expose anybody. I'm there to use the platform to help people if I can. And they have a lot more traffic than I have on my site. And they generally listen to what I have to say, even though they disagree. So there's redeeming value there for sure. And the other issues of what people are behind the scenes is something I can't control and really haven't seen myself other than Matthias that like I mentioned earlier. But I've got serious issues with some of their other friends that haven't been there, such as Jack Smack, the guy who destroys Bibles on camera. I even told him, I said, that's a terrible witness.
Does he destroy it if it's not a King James? He destroys it, or what?
Right. Yeah, and he'll just find devious ways to destroy the thing and disrespect it. And
he needs to destroy Geneva or something, or Tyndale. Just somehow get hold of something like that and destroy it.
Those are, a lot of King James onlyists don't even realize that the King James is the 7th or the 8th English translation. There were 7 before it.
Yeah, well, even if he were to find a King James with the Apocrypha, I think he should at least tear that out and crash it up.
Yeah, I just don't, I don't like the idea of destroying Bibles in front of the world, because unbelievers don't understand any nuance or difference between Bibles. They just see Christians destroying Bibles, and this is a terrible witness.
Well, that's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's. I just I only went to look at Jack Smack's channel one time, and that was pretty much enough for me. Everybody was going to hell except for him and a few buddies, because they, if somebody was from, I realize it goes back further, but, in relatively recent terms, if they're Calvinist or following Wesleyan teachings, they're going to hell, period. That's it, It's crazy.
Those are the people I can't get along with, and knowing that they're kind of part of that group, but they haven't been there since I've been there. There will be a problem if those people are on the panel the same time I am, and we get on one of those subjects. There would be a problem, and I would just say, look, I'm extremely against. I would try to be as polite as possible, but I would still speak my mind. And I don't know why God has me there. I just know that there are a lot of places that have pushed me away and banned me for either not reading the King James, or for thinking women can preach, or thinking salvation is secure. That there's a gazillion different reasons that people give for shutting me out, and they haven't done that. So I must be there for a reason, is all I know. I will not change my personal convictions just to fit in, but I will be cordial about disagreeing, and that's all I can ask from anybody, really.
Yeah, I can understand why, excuse me, somebody would believe that you could lose your salvation, and yet I understand why people believe that you can't. But when it turns into a separation where people just can't get along at all, and on the internet, which you're gonna have a lot of varied beliefs on the internet.
Mm-hmm.
And you get into the thing with women preaching. Well, that's pretty tough subject, I think.
Yeah, I've done. That's one of the things they are letting me talk about over there. And I was interviewed by both Luke and Renee And the one with Renee, that was the main topic because I wrote a book on the subject and she wanted me to talk about it. And got a lot of positive comments, got a lot of negative comments too from people who just think I'm a terrible witch. But a lot of people were helped by that.
Wait a minute. Can you prove you're not a witch?
Guilty until proven innocent, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the thing is it is a hot topic, and there are people in that group, the Sin City Preacher group, who vehemently disagree with me on that. But the question is whether they're going to make trouble about it. That's the issue.
Yeah. I was looking at the Shepherd's Ambassador. I mean, if somebody's King James only, to be honest, it doesn't bother me, probably because I was that way for a good many years. I'm not saying I'm right now, but I think I am, but I don't know. I think I'm right where I'm at. Well, at least not as far as my faith, but as far as the Bible goes, I don't think the King James is the only translation. But if someone does think that way, it doesn't offend me. With some people, I guess it does. I might disagree, but I'm not going to get overly worked up unless.
Right.
It probably does depend on how the discussion's going. I mean, if it's the type of thing where you're reading the wrong Bible and you're going to hell and everything because you're reading the wrong Bible, and then I might get frustrated with it, but.
Yeah, that's the whole attitude thing, and that's, I think, the main point of when I was talking to Renee is that there should be the fruit of the Spirit above all. They should be, anybody who purports to be a Christian should have the fruit of the Spirit and should be able to treat us like brothers and sisters.
Hold on here. Not that whole fruit of the Spirit thing. That's asking way too much.
Apparently so.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, I mean, it's not. It's something. One night I did a hangout because I was impressed that this guy Johnny Highland was on a guitar channel, and I remember in the past he had talked about being a Christian, and they were asking. This guy's asking who worked on his amplifier. The studio they were sitting in, and he was saying, well, he's working, what he's working on, whatever. I forget how it came up, but he's working on a gospel album and a Christmas album, I guess. I'm like, well, I guess there's people who would disagree with Christmas, whatever, but regardless, it's where he was, though. Who he is and how his demeanor comes across, to me, really speaks. It's certainly not out and out preaching, but it comes up enough here and there that I think most people probably recognize the guy's a Christian. And I would say his behavior in general backs that up. I think there's a witness in that to me. And sometimes when people really, they're claiming to be a Christian and they're really preaching about it and busting on everybody else, and you see horrible behavior coming from them, you wonder, well, it's not really somebody maybe you want to learn from, I guess, or be following as a teacher, at least.
Mm.
I don't know if that. I guess it's a bad witness. Maybe is my opinion. Maybe I'm too harsh or too strict, but.
Well, I think there's certainly room for a lot of spiritual growth and behavioral growth in people, but
absolutely right.
But yeah, if somebody's going to teach or take a stand on a theological issue, they ought to be mature enough to have that fruit of the Spirit, and to because that's a biblical requirement, and the whole chapter of First Corinthians 13 is all about that. If I had all knowledge, could fathom all mysteries, could speak every language, but have not love, I am nothing. So,
yeah, that's true. Yeah, like a clanging gong or whatever it is. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's it. Really does reflect on whether a person really understands the gospel, because in order to be saved, you have to be humble and grateful. And how could you throw that away especially toward other Christians, if you are truly saved, because you had to humble yourself knowing that you needed a savior, and you had to be grateful to accept the gift of being adopted as God's child. So how can anyone who's done that turn around and as Jesus put it, beat their fellow servants? It doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah, it's an odd thing to watch. Yeah, you get into the thing of making mistakes and that kind of thing. I mean, that's kind of the other thing about that. It makes it tough is that I expect with Christians, you do see them making mistakes. You see them doing wrong because they're human.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe it's, well, I think about it. Maybe it's the lack of, trying to think. I was always thinking that it was if somebody they would feel convicted and you'd think they'd have repentance. But I suppose so. If they are hurting other people or doing something to cause people to stumble, and it was brought to their attention, you think maybe they would apologize to those that they might have caused to stumble. If they were doing something wrong.
Yeah, that's the mature thing to do. Apologizing is hard. We all know that, but because it requires you to humble yourself, and it's a big problem. But I'm not saying somebody's not saved if they don't do that. I am just saying they're spiritually mature. It shouldn't be teaching,
Right, I can see your point. Yeah, it's was it sanctification and justification, I guess. One takes a while, I guess. And one
yeah.
For.
For technical terms, and people really get technical with those sometimes, but there's a verse in 1 Corinthians that says, you used to be all these bad things, but you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified. So it was a past event even for the backslidden Corinthians. So as far as spiritual maturity goes, I just wouldn't call it sanctification or justification. I would use a different term. I would use maturity, because the other things are said to be in the past tense. So that's just a little hair splitting that I do. But
so I'm not sure that I'm following it exactly somehow.
It's another thing I did a video on, but to be justified is to be declared cleared of all charges. You've been declared legally innocent. Okay, that's justification. Okay. Sanctification is set apart. To be sanctified means to be set apart for some holy purpose. And as a Christian, that's your position as being in Christ. That's something given to you at salvation. Because, like I said, and otherwise, 1 Corinthians wouldn't have said, you're got all these faults, but you were sanctified, you were justified. But they weren't mature. They were still worldly. So I'm just going by a strict biblical usage.
Yeah, I guess my thought is that people have to be honest, though. I think with God, and I don't think they could use justification or anything, salvation of any type, just thinking they have it, so then they can freely do anything they want.
Right.
God would know your heart, and that would be a game. It's
right. That's the in Romans, I think it is, goes into that license to sin argument, because it says we died to sin. How can we live in it any longer? We died to sin. And because of that, it doesn't mean we can't sin. It means that obligation, that relationship is broken. Because death is separation. And so if we are free from sin, we're not free to sin. So we don't have a license to sin just because we've received a gift and our salvation is guaranteed by the Holy Spirit as a deposit. That doesn't mean that we go back and live as though nothing happened. It's like if we're living in this terrible place as like an orphanage, and we accept adoption papers, that we're going to get out of there someday and be taken to a new place, we don't spend the intervening time beating on other people in the orphanage and treating them like crap and stealing and defacing the property you know, because if you accept adoption, what you would normally, a healthy person would want to do is try to change their mindset into that of their new home they're going to go to, which is, like not beating your fellow servants and not being like other people who haven't accepted. We're supposed to have a different loyalty. And that's what I look for in Christians who are trying to teach or tell me that I'm a witch or whatever it is. Show me the fruit first, and then we'll see about your theology.
Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if they weren't teaching and you were just having a discussion with them, I could kind of get it. But it is odd when somebody's teaching and but they just don't seem, I don't know.
Right.
Well, I don't see anything wrong with being godly. That actually seems to be an idea in the Bible. I think people are at least supposed to try.
Yeah. And then elders or guardians or whatever you want to call them, there's different words in the New Testament, have to be people who have not only tried but have been proven to practice that life, a holy life, that their example of living is a good reputation even among unbelievers, that they live pretty clean lives, and they know how to interpret the Bible. And those are requirements that you have to have demonstrated before you can be designated an elder. And yet we have, the Bible warns against people teaching, because they'll be held to higher standards. And yet we have people, as soon as they
Yeah.
get saved, they think they're teachers,
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, I think you're right about that. It's being held to a higher standard. That's a scary thing, really.
Right.
It's
It is.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to. I don't know. I guess
You're far away.
I've shared ideas what I thought was right. I don't know if that's really. Well, I guess it is teaching in some degree. How much is actually you have to teach before you're a teacher. Maybe that's a tough call.
Well, the thing is that the Christian community is supposed to be a mentoring community, where, like it says in one of the passages, about choosing leaders, it's like choose people that would be faithful to pass it on. And that's what is supposed to have been happening, all these centuries. But oftentimes we instead substitute a seminary degree or whatever, and people just are cut loose as teachers. And yet there's a warning against that. It says, don't be hasty in the laying on of hands, because if you do, you will share in whatever it is they do wrong. Because if they're elevated too soon, I don't like the word elevated, but designated too soon as an elder or teacher, they will become conceited like the devil and come under that judgment. And so, designating somebody an elder is a really serious issue, and it's not taken seriously anymore, as far as I can tell.
So you're not real big on cemetery school, I take it?
No. I think it has some value as far as, if they're teaching you the languages and good reading comprehension and history, because those things are part of the context, and you can't understand the Bible without its context. And so if they're going to be teaching others, they have to be aware of those layers of context and be able to at least understand what it is about the original languages that can solve some otherwise bad translations. You wouldn't know how to warn people against bad translations if you don't know what the original words are, or at least can look them up
Right.
in, an interlinear or a lexicon or something.
Well, but if you can make it through seminary school, if you can make it through that, and you still believe, you're probably doing okay.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some good ones, I'm told, but I've never set foot in one, so I wouldn't know firsthand.
Yeah. I think it really does depend on where somebody go, and but there's definitely things that people I think learn in seminary that is probably pretty difficult when it comes to some of the beliefs amongst different professors and such, and what they can or not teach within that school.
Right.
It'd be kind of tough, you know. It's
That's the thing, is there are always benefactors. There's people who fund or administer a school who will have certain requirements, or you're out. And anybody who's ever been to a classroom knows that if you want a good grade, you will please the professor. So things get perpetuated that way. Now, a lot of people will say, okay, I had to do or say this and that to get my diploma, but now that I've got it, I'm freer. You know how it is with music too. You go to music school and you learn how things should be done so that you're qualified to break all the rules later if you want. you know.
well, to be honest, I don't have much knowledge in how things should be done anyhow. But I know in rock and roll, and I guess in jazz you see that, and probably in some forms of classical. Um, but wow, uh, I really wish I did know more theory. Um, there's certain things I just don't understand how, like, somebody can have a certain key, and it's not like just modulating to another key. It's that they actually throw chords in that appear wrong, and then you'll see somebody explain why you can do it and what it does. I go, okay, I guess. you know,
Yeah.
I think it was in recent years, best I can figure the way this works, that kind of grunge movement. It seemed like they were playing chords that just seemed wrong, but somehow took off and people kind of got used to it. I don't understand that, but somebody, though, it's kind of odd to me that somebody with a real good understanding of jazz or something often can sometimes explain why you can do this or that. But then sometimes they do play so far out they think they're in. Some people maybe do. Others just think it's out there.
Well, it's an art form after all, so there is no really right and wrong, but it depends on, like, for example, in classical, you would have a lot more strict adherence to rules, whereas in jazz or, pop or something like that, you can do whatever you want. But the point is that, because I was told this in a music class, it's just that these learning these rules will give you something to start with. It'll help you in your creativity because basic principles of music. How this the relationship between notes, and why certain notes clash and others don't, and how to begin constructing a song. It's just there's a lot of technical things in music that most people don't realize, but at the same time, it is an art. And what the technical stuff does is give you the raw materials to work with, I think is pretty much how they would put it.
Yeah. I think that's sort of what the shepherd was saying in here, Ambassador, about what was he saying about needing something, some background, which I guess you could get that in seminary, but you could also get you can real easily get some real liberal ideas in
Oh
seminary.
yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
That is kind of how I see the Bible at this point in my life, but that doesn't make me right. So I mean, just because if I went to seminary school and they taught me what I'm thinking, that doesn't make it right.
Mm-hmm.
It would just mean that at least they're right then.
Right.
That's bad. No.
I like to watch.
Sometimes you find somebody who is willing to teach what you believe, then you're right.
Yeah, and I like to watch. There's these music. They're not music critics necessarily, but they're music teachers, and they will explain, take a pop song and break it down and explain what's good or bad about it and the technique of the singers or musicians, and
Oh,
I really enjoy that sort of thing. And you can tell that some of them are way beyond the technical stuff, that they understand the artistic side, but they have a deep understanding of the technical side too. And I think that makes them um, overall better musicians. But here again, it's an art form, and what's better in one person's eye is not another.
there's
So
a guy, Rick Beato. Have you ever heard of him?
no, not ringing a bell.
I think he's real good at that kind of thing. Um, but for me, like with music, I think it's odd that oh, I don't know. I'll hear a song that maybe an '80s song that I heard on the radio or at work somewhere or something, and I listen to it now and go, oh wow, yeah, that's pretty neat. Or I'll go back and listen to after the peer pressure wore off, and I realized that hey, the Bee Gees were actually pretty good, or
Mm.
because growing up as a kid, I had to like Black Sabbath and have my hard rock, whatever you want to call metal or whatever, and but I do remember as a kid looking there and stuck in that pile of records was The Sound of Music and Chet Atkins, and it took me a long time to realize I didn't have to follow peer pressure, you know,
Hmm.
because some music is just good whether you well, maybe that is the deal, whether you like it or not. But I guess if you don't like it, you're not going to want to listen to it.
Right.
Really, I spent probably a couple of years just off and on listening to "Achy Breaky Heart" and trying to figure out what it is that made that song.
I like the Weird Al cover.
I never heard that.
You'll have to look that up. Achy Breaky Song, he called it.
Yeah, that's got to be funny. Well, I suppose it was the guy's looks and the whole thing too that played part. But I still think that the catchy rhythm, the just pretty keeping it simple, stupid kind of things, and they had really great musicians playing on it too. It's
Uh,
maybe that's my interest in music kind of instead of necessarily being super complex. I just started trying to think more about what is it that people actually want to hear for the most part. What makes a hit song, I guess. You know.
right. I just watched earlier this evening. There's a channel called What Makes This Song Great, and I happened to listen to episode 71 on Boston, the band Boston, and More Than a Feeling. And it was a great song, but what he does is say why it was a great song, and he does it in very great detail. Well, he'll say, well,
Now,
here's what the bass is doing. Here's what the guitar was doing.
I'll bet you the guy you were listening to, he probably had some gray hair, but
Yeah.
that's Rick Beato.
Oh, okay.
That's the guy. Yeah, that guy's smart. I mean, he definitely
He
knows
is.
a lot. Yeah, he does.
And I don't know what equipment he's got, and he can just pick out one line. He'll take a song, the original song, and he said, okay, we're going to only listen to the bass line. Now we're going to only listen to the acoustic guitar in the background. This is perfectly isolated.
Yeah, there's some recordings where somehow with certain songs, some of the material did get out from the studio, and I'm not even sure how that happened. That's my understanding of what happened and where you can get some of that, because there are ways to isolate things somewhat, but you're right, they're perfect. So I'm pretty sure that's what he's doing with most of that, or he'll just sit and play it, sometimes.
Yeah, he was doing that. It was a good episode because I really liked that song, because that was, I was a teenager in the 70s, so that was, new when I heard it.
I'm sitting here thinking, I don't know what was that.
Yeah, basically, yeah, that's the chords.
Oh, yanked the cord out, so now you're saved from having to hear that. Yeah,
But
that was
I
a
guess,
cool song.
yeah, and I guess all of that to say that, getting back to going to seminary, is that I'm sure you could learn something useful there and maybe get some good foundational stuff. But the problem comes that it seems seminaries have turned into more of a factory to turn out CEOs, where this is how you run a church. This is how you lead a committee. This is how you, present good oratorical skills. The emphasis is more on those things from what I've seen come out of seminaries than it is on academics and learning the languages and learning the history and the culture and the figures of speech and all those things that, good reading comprehension depend on. So, and then you find out there are places that are no longer public that used to be, places like pastors.com, where you could essentially be a member and get free canned sermons, and you just change a few things here and there, and everybody thinks you're brilliant.
Yeah.
So,
there's, I think if somebody knows some Greek and Hebrew, and then they're brilliant in a lot of people's minds. I think they just figure, well, they must know everything, and
that's one of those things that if they might read a little, somebody said something about a Greek word and think that they're really breaking it down, when I've heard people totally misunderstand what's going on, like they don't understand the grammar and the tenses, and they say, well, like the Great Commission, they'll say, it doesn't say go out and preach the gospel. It says, as you're going, preach the gospel. Well, yes, it's a participle, going, do this, this, and this, but that's not what it meant in Greek in that time. It's, go and do this. It's still a command, even though it's not an imperative tense. There's a whole lot of things to consider, and most pastors don't have time to go that deep into the stuff. They're busy running a corporation, a 501c3, and they don't have time.
That's probably true. Yeah, I would think working in a church these days, it's pretty hard, I think,
Yeah. And I've seen pastors burn out because of that. And I've actually, the church that I go to has a rare kind of pastor that will actually listen to advice and then say, look, the reason you're burned out is because you're trying to do too much that isn't even a spiritual gift issue. It's a tradition issue. And trying to be the one-man band, this is going to burn anybody out. And the congregation has to share the load. And he totally agreed, and so, eventually they make some changes and try to get people more involved than the average church does, because there's too many people who are content to be pew warmers and just watch somebody else do religion for them,
Yeah, there's a lot of different, no doubt there's a lot of different churches and different ideas. I don't know. I mean, a really small church that has no ties with anything as far as government or anything like that, I'm not against that, but I do think at times they're more susceptible to really going haywire here and there.
Yeah, a big church or a small church, they can each have their own set of temptations and problems. I mean, I've been in both kinds, so.
Yeah, well, I guess where there's no committee or anything overseeing anything, and then it depends on what the committee believes and such, the oversee.
Right.
But
right.
I think with a small church, I guess kind of maybe my point would be, let's say like David Koresh was part of, I don't know, let's just say Assemblies of God. He could have maybe whacked out a good bit in it, but there would come a point where I think they would have said, hey, wait a second, what are you doing?
Well, denominations will maybe push somebody out, but that person will just start a cult, or whatever, get a following like he did. So
that's true. But I do think that some denominations, I think there is a place in that. Although they can still be wrong, of course.
Right.
But they're probably not going to go too wacky. I guess is maybe.
Yeah, but
tough call.
That's the thing, is it's a double-edged sword, because the bigger, when you have an organization, it will depend on the people at the top, and they're less accountable the bigger it is, because you don't have access to the head honchos, and to the ruling committee. It's just like government. If it gets too big, it's unaccountable and can do far more damage because it's big. Whereas at least in a smaller congregation, you have more direct access to the people who are the most influential, and you can call out a problem if there is one. But, they're not free from problems either. I just think the bigger the organization, the more damage can be done to more people.
Yeah, it's tough stuff though to me. I've seen churches that I thought did really well that didn't have any ties or anything, but then on the other hand, I've seen some that became very cultish.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of it's kind of tough. Like, I guess, like you said, it's a double-edged sword in a way. I guess when you get to denominations, that in itself gets people pretty worked up at times.
Yeah, and it's just a human tendency, whatever group they're in, whether it's a church group or some other religion or a secular group, they tend to have this us versus them. They like to please the group so they can feel accepted and approved and validated. And that's just the way people are, But if you're a person of conviction and principle, then you will politely stand up. And if you have to, you get a little nastier. But if something is wrong, you call it out. And this is why there are denominations, because people get thrown out for being whistleblowers or whatever. So the person who leaves isn't always the bad person and not always the good person. It's just people have faults and they can't get along. And I don't think denominations are always bad, because I think you'll reach more people that way. Because if you don't like the way one group of people does something, whether it's just a style issue or, what kind of music they play or whatever it is, you can find another one. And the work gets done because you're not forcing people together who can't get along.
It's true.
So, that's even in New Testament in Acts. The first missionary team was Paul and Silas. Paul and Barnabas. And they came back. They had another guy with them called John Mark, and he took off and left them in the middle of the missionary trip. And so when they got back and they're ready to go out on another one, Barnabas wants to take this John Mark along, and Paul is like, no way. They had a sharp disagreement, so they split up into two teams, and Paul took Silas and Barnabas took John Mark. So now you got two missionary teams, which is a good thing, even though it was a really sharp disagreement that caused it. So it's not always bad,
Yeah. So I know that some people were talking earlier in the comment section. I have to ask you before I'm probably going to have to get going here in a couple minutes, but we're asking about the flat Earth. What are you? I guess you're a flat earther, as best I remember, anyhow. Unless are you still pretty much into that, or?
Yeah, the thing is, on my channel is almost exclusively Bible studies. I have a few, DIY stuff. The cosmology playlist is just questioning the standard model. That's all I do. I just observe and raise questions about, I have seen this myself. I've studied it, for a number of days, and this is what I think is a problem with the current model. I think there's way too much that is taken on blind faith from authorities. I think that's a general problem, that people like to be accepted, like we were just saying. And in college, especially, if you want your degree, you will go along with the professor and the peers, your peer pressure. And I think that happens in science and academia as well. So I think everything deserves to be severely criticized and held to very high standards. So when it comes to Earth shape, just biblically speaking, what we can say for sure is that Earth is never described as moving. They have different words for ball and circle, and the Earth is always described in terms of being solid and in place. And when we would have, if we didn't believe that, we would have problems with things like Joshua's long day. The sun stood in its place and the moon stood in its place for 24 hours. That is just really, God can do miracles. We all believe that. But at the same time, I think there's more of a burden of proof on the standard model for explaining things like that in the Bible. But that's not going to go too far down that road right now. It is late. But
what about when you look at the moon, though? I know you've done some things.
Yeah.
That were pretty interesting with that. I remember you had a thing hooked up to your camera, to your phone. I think with a telescope that you could put your cell phone on or something.
Yeah, I brought a bracket. This is before I got the illustrious P900. I had this telescope, and it was only a 3.5-inch diameter lens, but it did pretty well. And I had a bracket that would allow you to put a cell phone next to the eyepiece, so I could take videos and stills that way. But I do, I don't march lockstep with anybody's, whatever crowd I'm hanging with. And I will say, look, I believe the moon is a sphere. It looks like a sphere. It is convex because of the lighting. I believe that it's translucent because, as I did in one of my moon videos, I said, look, here's this trackball from a computer mouse, right? It's a trackball. It looks solid. But if you shine a bright flashlight right on it, it glows with its own color. What that tells me is this thing is translucent, this trackball, because some light, depending on the angle, will bounce off of it, and some gets inside and then comes out. And I think that's what's going on with the moon, because I can demonstrate this on a scale, with the trackball. And clearly the moon is being externally lit because of the surface shadows. They are consistent with the properties of light. I have studied the physics of light, so I can verify this. It's experimental, that when you have shadows a certain way, that this is an external light and this is how light behaves. But at the same time, when it is full, it does not act like an externally lit sphere. It acts like an internally lit sphere. And I still say a sphere because if you focus on it, you change your focus, it's, I think, slightly different, shorter in the middle than it is at the ends. And that at the edges, that tells me that it is pointing toward me, that it's convex toward me. And so
I think that it's that big that you can see the focus change on the edges and the center. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and that's why I don't believe it's as big and far away as they say. There's no way this thing is 250,000 miles away, because I can zoom on it. Even with a cheap camera, I can zoom on it, and you can see craters with the naked eye that are like, they tell us 50 miles apart across. You should not be able to resolve that with your eye, but they are naked eye craters, like I think the Copernicus crater, the Tycho crater, are some of the big ones, and you can see those with the naked eye. You should not be able to do that on a 50-mile radius or diameter object on something 250,000 miles away. You should not be able to do that. So I don't believe the moon is as big and far away as they tell us, but I do believe that it's a sphere and it's externally lit, but it's translucent, so some of the light gets inside, because when the moon is full, it does not have a hot spot. It should have a hot spot if it's externally lit. It's not there, because, again, I can take any ball and shine a light on it. There will always be a hot spot. Some are more, depending on the material, like a rubber ball, like a racquetball, doesn't have as clear a sharply defined hot spot, but it's there nonetheless. It's brighter at part of it, right? So, but with the moon, when it's full, it is equally bright across its entire face. And that defies explanation for a strictly externally lit ball. So the moon is an enigma.
But I wonder if that could be due if the sun acts more like a floodlight than it would a spotlight. Because, immense, massive amount of light coming off it. I don't know.
Yeah, and see, this is where I've done some documents I put out that I can't get anybody in Flat Earth to look at, that because I'm wrestling with the whole light as quanta and waves and all these things too. And I've done some videos on quantum mechanics as well. But the thing about the sun is I've watched it for like 2 summers, right? And it does things that defy explanation in any model. And it has 4 different motions that people aren't aware of. And, because we have an X, Y, Z axis plus a clock rotation that goes the opposite way it should if we're doing the spinning. But, I have a sun video that people can watch if they're curious. But I watch what the sun does. It does match timeanddate.com. I disagree with flat earthers who say it doesn't. It matches that. And things are predictable, but that doesn't tell us anything about Earth shape. It just tells us that stuff moves across the sky in a predictable way. I built sundials. I built the flat kind and the angled kind. I know how they work and why. I know the sun does, and the moon moves 15 degrees per hour. This, again, does not tell us what the shape of the Earth we're standing on is. It tells us what the luminaries do and that they do it habitually, and that's all we know.
Well, now that I think about it, though, I often think about Rand when he was saying about the Earth flying through space at 1,000 miles per hour, whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's rotation speed, but then there's, it's the speed it's flying through space. But when you think about the sun, though, if the sun is actually moving instead of the Earth spinning, the sun would have to be moving at an insanely fast speed through space, so wouldn't it?
Right, but that's assuming there's space and assuming we're moving. There's a lot of assumptions.
Moving. I mean, if the Earth were flat, and the sun does seem to be pretty far away, it would still have to be moving pretty fast. I mean, we figure it's higher than airplanes fly at any rate.
Right.
Is how many? I mean, what would be your estimation of how far away the sun is?
I don't know. And part of the reason I don't know is because in my sun video, I explain why I believe there must be some kind of lensing effect between sun and Earth such that we don't know the sun's real location. We can't triangulate it. And because of the 4 motions, I go into detail on that. But the thing is that only when the sun is directly overhead do you have minimal distortion and its actual location as opposed to its apparent location, because things as it moves across its arc at the horizon, you get much more distortion. And yes, I've looked at it through a filter, so I know, about size changes, but I don't have a very wide view of the sky, so I can't verify, confirm, or deny whether the sun changes angular size or not. I don't know. And that's all I will say is I don't know.
You mean with your camera or with?
Yeah, I mean, you can get a fairly cheap solar filter you buy a sheet of it, right? I got some on Amazon for like $10, like a 6x6 sheet. And I just cut it to fit. What I did with the P900 is I got a set of telescoping lens adapters. You get a whole set of them for real cheap, that different diameters, right? So you can adapt to different attachments. Yeah. And what I did was I cut a sheet of this into a circle between 2 slightly different sizes of lens adapters. And I put that on my camera. And so it's like having a fancy solar filter. So, for dirt cheap. Instead of, $70 or $80, I got one for like $15.
What's the widest setting on the P900 like? Is it like does it go down to like 18 or 16, or what is it?
You mean how wide of an angle it can shoot?
Well, I mean, as far as its millimeter, what they would call it. In other words, I don't know if it goes with that or not.
Are you talking zoom level or?
Well, that's a tough thing, though. I guess it's all really based on a full frame, which I guess the P900 has a pretty small sensor in it to be such an incredible magnification.
Right.
But sometimes like you'll see like a real wide field of view, almost a fisheye would be maybe around 10 or 12, somewhere in there, and you get up to and then you'd have wide. Would be, I guess, somewhere starting around maybe 16 or 18 or something, up to like 20, some or 30, and you know what I mean by that.
So you're talking about lens barrel distortion?
No. It's more or less like if you're looking at it in the sense of a full frame, like 35 millimeter
Okay.
uh, film or a sensor, then what you would see is like a 50 millimeter. That's pretty much what most people, I think, accept as was normal.
Yeah, 50 millimeter is most like the human eye, I'm told. So
Yeah, except that when you have an APS-C sensor, it's considerably smaller,
right.
and it's going to be maybe like a 30 some or something. I think I forget how this works out now. They
Yeah. So
are, but then you get down to even smaller sensors, like the size of your cell phone, and I'm not sure where the P900 fits in. But then things really change a good bit. So I don't know if they're using millimeters or just simply times. How many. I know that it's really, really high when that thing is. I mean, heck, on my camera, I'd have to have a lens that it might be like 3 feet long or something, to even come close to what you can do with yours.
right. There's always trade-offs. And like for example, the P900 does well with the sun and moon, but not so with anything else in the sky at night. Especially, I've managed to get some half decent video of Saturn and Jupiter, but it's really not an astrophotography camera. It's
Well, that's the weird thing is on my camera, one of the things I could do that was really cool, and I was just thinking about it the other day, was how, like my cell phone, I thought, well, gee, what's the sense of having, you could put a lens on that makes it a real wide field of view, or
mm,
almost like what did I say earlier, your fisheye kind of lens. And I think, well, that's kind of cool, but heck, I guess what I was thinking is my cell phone, I could do that. So what's the sense of having a half decent camera that I can do that? Why did I even buy this lens? And then I
right.
realized, well, part of the reason that makes it different is that I can open my aperture up to like 1.2, which, and then with a decent sized sensor, I get really a lot of light in that way, and that's something I certainly can't do on my cell phone. And I think that's what you're talking about too. Is that if I aim my camera up, and then depending on how long you take the picture, if you leave the shutter speed, if it's really slow to get all the light, you're going to have some streaking in it from as things are moving.
Right.
Where with my camera, because I have a larger sensor, that it allows me to get better pictures of the stars, that kind of thing. But then on the other hand, you get to that whole thing of there you are carrying a camera that's pretty small and light, and yet you can zoom out and look at the moon without a 3 foot long lens.
Right. It's a decent all-purpose camera. If you can only afford one, you might want to get that. It depends on what you want to do with it. Most people are using it to shoot across water or something like that, and it's fine for that. But um, I don't have wide open spaces where I live, so I tend to look up at the sky, or I'll shoot nature photography. Like I just put up a video of hummingbirds and things today, and it does a really nice job. It's convenient that I can zoom in because I don't have to be, like if you want to photograph birds, you're usually at some distance away, and you need a pretty decent lens to shoot anything in detail. Where with the P900, because it's a zoom lens, I can be at any distance I want, pretty much.
Right.
Now, yeah, for so it depends on what you want it for, and you really need two different kinds of cameras if you want to do astrophotography. And I did my husband and I built a barn door tracker for my tripod. It works fairly well. It's got some shake in it because we don't have fine enough tooth gears, to drive the thing, but it will track. It will track at the right speed. We got a, I did a video on it if you're curious, but
Yeah, what is that exactly? I'm not familiar with that.
it's a poor person's. Um, I just lost the term. What am I trying to think of?
Word tracker you were talking about?
Yeah, it's basically, you aim it. You know what a barn door hinge? It's just a big hinge for a big barn door, and
Okay.
like any hinge, you're going to point. You're going to have on a tripod and level and straight. You're going to have one part of the hinge, right? The other part of the hinge is going to move. It's going to have your camera on it. So, but you aim the hinge, if you or put your eye along where the hinge is, you're going to aim that at Polaris. Okay. Because Polaris isn't going to move. Everything moves around Polaris. And depending on your latitude is basically your angle to Polaris. So if you're at 40 degrees north parallel, you will aim you will angle your tripod up at 40 degrees and point that hinge at it. Right. And then you can put your camera on the top part that's going to move and aim it at anything you want in the sky and then lock it in that position and turn this thing on, and it will track at 15 degrees per hour and keep that thing centered. But you have to have also a motor. You have to have it a bolt that's in an arc that is from the radius, that's the distance between the hinge and where the bolt is. That's the radius of a circle. So your bolt has to be angled, has to bend, arc around that circle, right? So in order for this thing to work, but it does work. It's a kludgy kind of a thing, but it does work. If you can't afford, it was an equatorial mount or something like that, which can cost many, more than your camera. Yeah, this is the poor person's tracker. So
the thing that kills me is like, when you get looking at lenses and that kind of thing, man, you can easily spend more on a lens than you paid for your camera,
Yeah.
I mean, you could have, my cameras, I bought them, pretty much when they were a year or so out of date or used or something, and you get $400 or $500, $600, whatever, tied up in a camera, and you start looking at lenses, you go, wow.
Yep. I used to have a $99 camera body back in the days of film. It was a Pentax ME Super, but I wanted good lenses for it, so I got some Tamron lenses. They're pretty good lenses.
Yeah, they're pretty decent. Yeah.
And yeah, they cost many times more than the camera body.
Right. And well, that's the thing that I've seen is that, it's like the one lens I was just telling you about. Goodness, Sam Yang, I think, made it. It was under a couple different names, this lens, and it's, what the heck is it? It's a 14 or 16 millimeter, I'm thinking. It's pretty wide field of view. Maybe it's even 12. I forget now. But, and it was like, I think, $250, $300. And people really did rave. They still do. They rave about the quality of it. And yet the funny thing about it is there's no electronics in it. Everything's manual.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's no focus. The only focus you have is manual focus. But, if I'm taking pictures of the sky or something else anyhow, it really doesn't matter that much. But that's considered a cheap lens, Well, really,
right.
and you get looking, it's real easy to spend, well, if I wanted a good, wish I could think of the proper terms, something for distance, telescopic or whatever.
Yeah, telephoto, yeah.
It's real easy to get into, oh my gosh, $600,000 or more.
Oh, yeah.
That's incredible. And
it's complex when you hear professional photographers talk about, like, when they were setting up to watch the eclipse a couple of years ago. There's like, man, you had to bring a truckload of equipment if you wanted. You're real professional, right? And you're expected to put out a lot of high quality images. You had all sorts of trackers and lenses and bodies that all had different properties, and know what you're doing with it, because you can really, you can, probably get a technical degree and all that stuff, because there's so much to think about, so many variables.
Like taking pictures of boxes and putting your camera inside this thing or something that reflected off the back on a piece of paper and through a little hole and all this, and I don't know. And then there's other people I know just use filters like welding goggles and different things. I tried that.
Mm-hmm.
Using my cell phone and looking through welding goggles. I don't know.
What I did, I took that sheet of solar filter that I bought, and I made some little ones from my binoculars. So that what I would do is I just take a strip of cardboard and wrap it around the lens of whatever I wanted to put it on, and then cut out a circle of the material to fit and just slip it over the lens. It works really well. And these are you can't get cheaper sun filters than that.
Gosh, man, when I was a kid, we had this telescope, probably bought it at Sears or something, and it had a real dark lens for looking at the sun with. I wonder if that was really okay or not. I don't know.
I don't know, because there's neutral density filters, which some people use, that they're just not as safe. I wouldn't trust them. I would go with an actual solar filter.
Yeah, I haven't taken too many pictures of the sun. I don't know. It's not too much with that kind of thing. Like I said, I used my cell phone and those goggles. I think that's about the most I ever did with anything like that. And
right.
Once in a while, I use a cheap lens or something, and that create a lot of flare by accident. Sometimes it looks cool, but I don't even aim it directly at the sun.
Mm-hmm.
Some cameras, they say it's really bad. It can burn up the sensor or something or hurt it.
Yeah, I think anything with a CCD or any kind of electronics in it, you wouldn't want to point that at it.
Yeah. Well, you got me thinking. One day, I wouldn't mind having something like the P900. I think that would be kind of cool to have.
I will say I think that one of its biggest faults is that it only shoots in JPEG, which means it's compressed from the start. So if you really wanted to study a photo that you took and look for anomalies or whatever, you're already at a disadvantage because it doesn't shoot RAW. So
yeah,
the 1000 does. But
yeah, I was seeing it came out with a P1000, and I guess Sony and Panasonic, a number of different companies have something to contend with it, I guess, nowadays. But
yeah,
I think as far as doing it's kind of tough. I mean, as far as something though, I guess what I'm thinking is if you were into like really serious nature photography, to have a full frame and a big long lens, or something a little smaller than full frame maybe, but and having, but you just don't carry that around with you every day like you can carry something like
right.
And I think it's amazing to have something that small that if you see a bird or something that 200, 300, 400, 500 yards away, you can take a picture of it.
Right.
That's the cool thing about it to me, is why I think it would be nice to have.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be cool. But
how's it like in twilight hours? Like early in the morning or evening, right before it gets dark, or is it starting to get a little too dark for far away shots, do you think, and keeping within a decent ISO setting?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, do you have to crank your ISO up pretty high, or is it
yeah, depending if you're doing aperture priority or shutter priority, I can spell it better than I can say it. You would want the lens, the lens and the ISO and everything has to work together. And that's, most people don't understand how technical it gets to try to really do high quality photography. And there's a lot of people running around with P900s who think, oh, they just jump to a conclusion after some picture they took without considering, yes, you can have lens flare even with that, especially, I mean, it's a complex lens. To do what it does, it's got a lot of elements in it, and every element puts another layer of distortion on things, and there are some elements that are there to try to undo some of the distortion of the other elements.
Right.
And it's really complicated, and like those pictures I've seen of people would take of the stars and say, look, it looks like water. I think it's out of focus. I don't care how sharp it looks.
Yeah.
You want to focus something, you have to bracket before and after. So if I'm looking at, Jupiter, I have to really zoom, not to infinity, mind you, even though it's supposed to be that far away, but I can zoom before it and after it. And you look for when it's the smallest, that's when you're in focus. And people don't know how to do that. And if you do that, I can make anything in the sky look like it's watery and nice and sharp. But I know that if I keep zooming, it's always short when they do that. When it looks watery, it's short. You have to zoom out farther, and then it gets smaller and smaller, and then it's a circle of light or whatever. And you can keep zooming, and it'll get fuzzy again. But
What about manual settings? Do you have an ability to go totally manual or?
Yes and no. If you're doing a still shot as opposed to video,
Right,
you
right.
can go full manual. The only thing that really bugs me about the P900 as opposed to the 1000 is that it's only electronic focus. So you have to push a lever to focus,
Oh,
and
okay.
it's slow. It's annoyingly slow. I wish I had a manual focus for it, but it will get you there. It just takes a while and you have to be very patient, but you
You're,
can, I mean,
you,
you can control that.
you can adjust your aperture and your ISO.
Yeah, pretty well too. Once you learn the menu system, which I hate about modern electronic cameras, is just so complicated to get through the menus sometimes, and you got to remember which dial to turn to do what. Now the video, you can do an aperture lock, but in order to see like the stripes on Jupiter, you have to start recording. You can't do it while it's paused. You have to start recording, shine a flashlight down the barrel, and then the aperture lock so that it underexposes in video, and then you can see the stripes. But if you do that, then you can't see the moons. So it's a trade-off. But like I said, this is not an astrophotography camera. That's just the nature of the beast, the P900.
Right. Yeah, I think I could see your point though. Well, that's the way it is with anything. It's like one of my cameras. It's an old Sony NEX7, which I guess is getting pretty dated by now, but I still like it. You know, there's things that your camera will do that'll never do though,
Right.
and I guess
It's
so you can't have everything.
right. That's the thing, is if you have to just pick one, it's a pretty good one because it's also point and shoot. I can put it on full auto and get pretty decent shots of most things, most situations. So, um, but it will also do the extreme zoom, which is the main thing I bought it for.
Well,
You
yeah,
know,
pretty amazing. I mean, I would think it would be really cool if you were, if you were out in the parking lot or something and you were taking pictures of seagulls or something, no matter how far away or close, you should be able
right?
to of it.
And that's another thing is people don't understand when an extreme zoom comes extreme problems with control because
Yeah,
it's very hard to especially if something's moving. You zoom in on it tight, and it's very frustrating to keep track of.
yeah, just a small shake. I mean, even on a tripod, it's hard to.
Yeah, the
I'm
wind blows. I mean,
Yeah,
it makes it shake.
most zoom I have is I have a 200. The lens is 200, and then I have a 2x magnifier.
Hmm.
So, and I agree. I mean, and even at that, I mean, just trying to follow something like a bird in the sky is really, really tough. So,
Yep.
and I mean, and you're way beyond that. I mean, I think it's the equivalent to 1,000 or something really insane.
I forget what the equivalence is, but it's an 83x. So, and then you can go digital beyond that.
Right, right.
But I have, like I've said, I've had kind of so results trying to get Jupiter and Saturn, and stars are just they're not much bigger when you zoom in on them. But it's interesting. There's some presettings, right? The scene settings on the P900, and that has one for the moon. I mean, you point it at the moon, you push OK, and it will be it'll fill the frame, it'll be in focus, it's all set for you, right? Because the moon's distance is going to change appreciably, but it works equally well on the sun. It doesn't know you're pointing at the sun. If you use the moon setting, which I did for the eclipse in 2017, I used the moon setting for the whole thing, and it came out perfect.
Was it New Genesis wants to know what does this discussion on cameras have to do with flat Earth?
Well, it's an important foundational thing because you're going by observation. You have to know how you're observing. You have to understand how light works. You have to understand how lens barrel distortion works, or you will jump to wrong conclusions. And that's kind of a basics sort of thing.
Yeah,
But
Well, I don't even know that there's too many lenses that don't have a certain amount of distortion, one way or the
Oh
other.
yeah, they all do to some degree. You sacrifice something.
Yeah, I mean, when you're really zoomed, like to as strong as it can zoom, I mean, what do you have at that point? I mean, does it have like a pillow cushion effect or this or that? Or, I know there's different things people talk about, but I'd imagine there's probably some effect.
I kind of glossed over the really technical specs on what kind of lens system this is and what its faults are, but from just using it, I would say that when it comes to things like the sun and the moon, it does an excellent job. Everything is nice and sharp. Especially, I use manual on those anymore because the moon setting will be good for a quick grab shot. But if you really want a tight focus, I prefer to use the manual. But
What do you what do you end up setting your iris at, or your? I mean, do you have it wide,
aperture,
or yeah, your aperture?
I'd have to look and see what it wound up as. But I've bracketed. I've tried different things to try to get
And I
like
guess the wider you have your aperture set, though, then your focus is probably really touchy, isn't it?
well, yeah. I mean, the smaller the aperture, the
More.
wider depth of focus. Yeah, more depth of field. Whereas if you open up the aperture, you have a shallow depth of field, so your focus is going to be much more delicate.
Right.
So it's another necessary trade off of the physics of light. There's just no way around that one.
No, no, there isn't. I have a picture of my cat that I put on my computer on the my desktop, and it's I had it wide open, and it's cool because it blew everything out in the background. Her eyes are like perfectly in,
Right.
everything out is totally blown out. But now, of course, they do that with electronics.
Right. Remembering we were talking about breaking rules in music, I did that in one of my film camera when I had the Tamron lens and I would shoot macro photography like a flower or something. They tell you not to do that in bright sunlight. You want to shoot in kind of overcast. Well, I did it in bright sunlight just to see. And it turned out really well because it so blocked out the background and that it looked like a studio shot. So
Yeah.
it depends on what you want.
Now, were you using a? I've noticed if you use a flash while you do that,
Yeah.
it'll make everything in the background totally black, except for the object that you're shooting at.
Right. If you're filling the frame mostly too. I mean, that's a factor too. But if you have most of the frame, like 70, 80% of your objective and you use a flash, yeah, you'll wipe out the background. But
Yeah.
opening up the aperture a lot also, you get that very tight focus, which you want if you're doing macro photography. You want to blur out the other stuff. So
Yeah, I was playing around with macro for a long time, a good while anyhow, and I just found it really, really hard to hold my hands that steady, and
mhm.
um,
Yeah, you need a tripod for that.
yeah, but the problem is you can't really carry a tripod around with you.
Right.
Um, yeah, it gets really tough, I think, trying to figure out how to do that, and my back's not the best either, so it's really hard because you're constantly bent over doing that job.
Right. I found that it helps if you're sitting down because you can rest your elbows on a table or something. Because I did that with my hummingbird videos that I put up today. I was all handheld, and because when you're shooting birds, you can't tripods don't do you much good because they move,
Right,
and
exactly.
so this is you have to do handheld. So either if you can't lean your elbows on something, you can lean them against your ribs and just hold it's not the heaviest camera for what it does. It's not that heavy, but it's still got a fair amount of weight to it, and so any movement, you kind of have to slow your breathing when you're using that technique, but it does work if with practice. And I don't have the steadiest muscles, but you
No,
know
it's like target shooting or something. I was trying to do insects, and I just found that tried a number of different lenses and then reverse lenses, and I don't know if you ever got into that stuff, but oh man, yeah, it's tough. And
yeah, that's
yeah,
what's go ahead, sorry.
yep, it's just really hard. I found, and as far as focusing, yeah, there is no manual focusing because you don't really need it. It's just moving back and forth just ever so little bit is enough to throw it off, knock it out.
Right. That's another limitation of the P900 is that you do not have interchangeable lenses. You have what you have.
Yeah, but
So,
that's it's a drawback, but in a way. But I also think the fact that you can, I don't know how to say it. I mean, on the other hand, it is enclosed, so you're not going to be getting dust and stuff in it so easy.
yeah.
And that you just have a small package that you can carry around that zooms out that far. I mean, I think that's where the super zoom cameras are really cool.
Right. And that's all I wanted. I needed a general purpose camera because I can only get one. So it had to be, a point and shoot for general. It had to be zoomable and have various settings for depending on what I wanted to look at. So, and it's the best I can do for the money for an all-in-one.
Yeah, I think that's pretty neat. And considering you wanted to shoot across waters and be able to look at the moon and different things and stuff, I mean, that does all that stuff really well,
Right.
And
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
well, anywho, I guess I will probably head to bed.
Yeah, it's midnight, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm glad you came in though. It was fun talking cameras and
Yeah. Yeah, we didn't really get into Earth shape, but that's not important because it's a huge issue of its own. And like I said, my attitude is just make observations and try to draw scientific conclusions from it. And I think there's enough from what I've seen myself to raise serious questions about our cosmology. And I like I said, I don't march lockstep with anybody, whether it's on the Bible or Earth shape or anything else. Other conspiracies. Is NASA a bunch of liars? What's the government doing? I just don't. I always make people prove what they say if they're claiming something's a fact. And
yeah,
this is a problem on both sides of the Earth shape debate. I think there's an awful lot of blind faith on both sides.
Well,
So
the firmament then I guess would be the atmosphere. Does that sound right? Or
well, the atmosphere means that you can't, anything you're looking at in the sky is going to suffer some kind of distortion.
but that the firmament would be the end. I guess that's the end of how far you think it goes. Right?
Well, if you look at Genesis 1 for firmament, it contains the sun, moon, and stars. Okay, so however, whatever anybody wants to say about what it's made of or how big it is, Genesis 1 says that God put the sun, moon, and stars in the firmament. So it has to contain those things. And there are waters, even post-flood references, there are waters still above the firmament. What people want to do with that is their business, but that's just an observation I make about the scriptures. And as far as science is concerned, again, we have to do an awful lot of blind faith trust in things that we can't observe ourselves. And that bothers me.
But the waters have to be above it, some type of waters, so that as it speaks of, I don't know whether you take it figuratively or not, but as the windows open, that's what would allow the water, what we see as rain, though, right?
Well, rain isn't said to be from the windows of heaven. The windows of heaven were from just the flood, that they were opened and the fountains of the great deep opened. But those things shut after the flood, and yet we've had rain. I think that's just the water cycle, the way, evaporation and condensation and convection currents work and all that. But so I don't think that has really that much to do with the windows of heaven.
Oh, okay. The firmament, though, would have a dome kind of rounded shape, though, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, when the Bible uses the expression the circle of earth, it's talking about the horizon as you see it. If you stand on any point, you will turn all around, turn 360, and you will see what appears to be a continuous arc. So
oh, okay. When you're saying like, well, that's what in Job or something talks about a circle.
Isaiah, I think, but I'd have to look. But Job has some other interesting things as well about earth shape in like chapter 38 and forward.
It's suspended by nothing, I think.
Yeah, and you can take that either way. Um, so there's no slam dunk on either side, but I do think that the burden of proof would lie on standard cosmology, because the Bible, even by people who believe in evolution and standard cosmology, such as Michael Heiser, he's an expert in ancient Semitic, ancient Near East languages and all that, and he made the model for Bible.org, which is of a basically snow globe. He said, this is what the ancients believe. This is what the Bible describes. It describes a snow globe where we're, on a flat surface, and the firmament is a dome above us, and then we have the great deep below us. And he says that is what the Bible describes, even though he does not believe that the Bible is being literal at that point. He doesn't believe the Bible is literal in Genesis, but he's being intellectually honest about what the Bible describes. So he's, in a sense, a hostile witness when it comes to flat Earth. He does not believe the Earth is flat or young, but he says that's what the Bible presents if you take it literally.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that guy. I've never really studied him much. Yeah.
I don't agree with his theology at all. I don't agree with his approach to the Bible as far as interpretation goes. He's good at what he does. He's got a PhD for a reason, and it's in language and culture and understanding what is being described by the people at the time. He's an expert in that. So I value his opinion on that. But when he comes to interpretation of the Bible and theology, no, I don't agree with him.
Doesn't he get into some of the like Enoch and books like that and that kind of thing?
He does. He references them. He doesn't make any comment as to whether he thinks they should be in the canon as inspired by God, but he does reference those as historical witnesses. So, but to be fair, all the stuff about the Nephilim and the giants and all that can be gotten from the Bible as it is without referencing Enoch or Jasher.
That's true. I've heard it argued for years, so like going way back, before the internet. I remember people debating. I don't know. Yeah, it's a tough.
Yeah, see, I don't think Earthshape is a hill to die on, but I think there should be more healthy skepticism of the model we've been presented with for a number of reasons. And Earthshape or Earth Age, I believe it can be argued with science alone. It's not, to me, a necessary thing about Bible interpretation. But if we're honest with the Bible, it never describes it as a spinning ball. And, so the burden of proof would be to say that it does support that. I don't think it does. I think it describes it as flat and stationary. That's just the way it's described. And like I said, what people want to do with that is their business. But I don't make the Bible bow to anybody. And science prides itself on always changing. There's a course I took, one of the physics courses in college was 7 Ideas That Shook the Universe, because physics changes the whole paradigm every so often in history. So why would I make the Bible bow to the current model? It doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah, it's some weird stuff. I always thought that when you went in an airplane or something, you would see the curvature of the Earth, but it's apparently very, very minimal. And I guess even that somebody could argue, but
right,
not as easy as a lot of people thought, at least as I thought.
Right. I mean, we've had hot air balloon footage from 120,000 feet that shows no curvature. In making careful that you have a lens that's not going to put curvature in, that's the problem. But, looking through plane windows is very distorted. So we really, as amateurs, can't get currently above about 120,000 feet.
Well, I think you just have to get outside of the airplane, and take a picture.
It'd be the last thing you ever do, but
yeah.
But that's the thing, is it's, for me, what's important is, when it comes to the Bible, is I take it as inspired by God, and other things will just have to bow to it. And whether something's figurative or literal or not, I think the text has to tell you, the context has to tell you. And if you allegorize or spiritualize too much, then you reach a conundrum like Michael Heiser reached, where he said, what does this do to the resurrection of Christ from the dead? If everything is so very, if we can't believe miracles, that's a colossal miracle. And you have to believe it if you want to call yourself a Christian. And yet, if you're consistent, and he makes a good point about consistency, if you're consistent in your hermeneutic, whether it's literal or allegorical, you're going to run into problems at some point. So, how to solve the problem. He solves it with allegory, but he knows that impacts the gospel itself. And I solve it as literal, but I know that impacts science itself. But I would rather, if given the choice between the two, sacrifice science to the Bible than the other way around.
All right, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
But yeah, I know it's to nobody's satisfaction, but it is late. I need to get to bed. I think you do too, right?
Yeah, it's time to go. All right. Well, thanks for coming in. And I guess something's changing here with YouTube, I guess, with Hangouts. So I'm glad you joined. Thank you.
No problem. Yeah, they're going to do away with Hangouts. And I don't know if they're going to replace it with something or what it will be like. But by the end of the year, it will not be as it is now. This is why when I do a Hangout, I broadcast from OBS using either Discord or Skype or something else. You feed it to OBS and then you feed that OBS to wherever you're streaming. That way, I think you should still be able to do live streams, but it's more complicated. So
changing at the end of this month.
Well, I think some people, they roll things out in stages. I think it's completed by the end of the year is the thing.
Wow.
So yeah, it's like with what was it that with G Plus. It was phased out in stages. There's no more G Plus anymore.
Right.
So, but yeah, that's the thing is if the less you can depend on YouTube, the better.
Yeah. I guess. I think it's the price is right. Can't complain too much.
Yeah, that's true. But then they cross the blurry line between a private company and a public utility because of what it's become, and businesses depend on it now. It's like public highways or public airways. Now we have social media taking over those spots, and they really need to regulate it because as a private company, they can violate laws that affect people's lives. And so this is, not a matter of if you don't like our service, go someplace else anymore. Like search engines, you can't hardly get away from Google, and that's a monopoly, and that's a problem.
Yeah, I see your point. And you go to different search engines, it's rare to find something that it's really as good as Google.
Right.
How long?
Go ahead. Sorry.
Logan, you still here? I didn't see him come in. I at the comments.
He's been muted the whole time. He's sitting here in panel.
Muted?
Yeah.
Yep, I can unmute him.
And that's okay, I guess. I don't know. Maybe we talk too much.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go to...
All righty. Thanks again. We'll see you.
See you guys. Thanks for coming by.
Bye.
Right. Bye.